The parents agreed to the behavior intervention plan. They did not agree to the public school. The third choice is to not sign it at all. If you go into one and they say, we want to stop services for little Johnny, please don't sign the IEP. You have the right not to sign that IEP, and that means the last one becomes a stay in place. It triggers due process, which means that the school has to prove why they're taking that away from your family.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Love and Grace podcast. I'm your host, Grace. Today I am joined by Opal McCartney. Welcome, Opal. How are you feeling today?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on today and being a part of this mission. So we are going to dive into IEPs. What are they? How can their kids get them? Does their kid need them? And how do you support the families in this program in their IEPs? Let's go into that.
So there are two programs that assist students in a school, and there is the IEP, which stands for the Individual Education Plan. And then there's a second program, which is called a 504 plan. Both are born out of legislation, federal legislation, to provide accessibility to students in school. The difference between a 504 and an IEP is services. An IEP includes services such as speech, specialized academic instruction, occupational therapy, behaviorist, ERMS, which is educationally related mental health services, and a host of other ones as needed for each child. The other difference is that those services come with goals, and then the way that the IEP is governed, the IEP is a federal program, so any school reports directly to the federal government, and the federal government will come in and do an audit and pull so many cases at random to make sure that they're being followed and being done correctly. A 504 is less formal, and the records are governed by the school itself or sometimes by the district or county office of ed. So because of that, an IEP is much more formal, but the parent rights are the same for either an IEP or a 504.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's very educational. That gives them the understanding of what it is. How can a parent figure out if their kid needs it? What tests can be run?
Both a 504 and an IEP are done through testing. So you're not going to ask a school for an IEP because what you're going to ask for instead is testing. You're going to say, I would like my child tested for special education. Make sure that you put it in writing. Make sure that you sign it. I take a physical copy to the school and have them time and date stamp it. Then they cannot say they did not receive it. Secondly, I follow that up with an email, and that email goes to the classroom teacher and the principal. For high school, it goes to the homeroom teacher, the principal, and the counselor. Mm-hmm. And if that way, the school is completely aware of this process. They have 15 days to respond and say, okay, here is our assessment plan, or to give you a prior written notice of why they're holding off on doing that. If you sign a request, they have to follow through with special education testing. Mm-hmm. So sometimes a school will say, no, we want to do what's called a student study team first. And you politely decline and say, no, in the interest of time, I would like to go ahead and proceed with testing, because otherwise it can take a full school year before they get the testing they need. Mm-hmm. And so if you follow those, you will get the testing. And then if the student qualifies for an IEP, then they will get an IEP. If they do not qualify for an IEP for some reason, then that's when a 504 would kick in. And if your student is placed on a 504 and you are a LEAF family, please make sure you reach out to me and let me know when you're doing the testing and let me help walk you through that program. But also your student, you have the right to have your child tested once a year. You also have the right to have your child tested by a third party so that they get an independent, non-biased result. So if your child was not qualified for an IEP last year, I would definitely have it redone this year by an independent third party.
Awesome. Thank you. That's step by step. If you have a concern about your child's behavior or falling behind in school and you think that this can't just be my kid's fault, there's got to be something there, take these steps, push. There might be pushback in the public schools. What about charter? Is charter the same steps?
Oh, good. That's a really good question. So charter school is different from a private school because a charter school is still considered a public school. And so all public schools fall under what's called FAPE, free and appropriate public education. Your child has a right to have whatever services they need to be able to access an education. Now, when I say that, we're talking about the regular, standard model. We're not talking about the Corvette model of education, but just the regular sedan model. So if you go into an IEP and say, I want my child to have this service, it is the best for them, they're not going to get it. Because the school does not have to give you the best. They have to give you what is required. This program is the most appropriate program for my child, and it meets their needs in this way, rather than it's the best for my child. We're talking about required, necessary, needed, not wanted.
Perfect. Absolutely. Okay, so we have the schools, school types, and how to get started. Please go on.
I also wanted to kind of clarify about who would qualify for an IEP.
Let's do it.
Or a 504.
Yeah.
We're talking about anyone who cannot access the curriculum for some type of reason. So whether that's, we normally talk of behavior, we talk about a learning disability. Another thing that we need to talk about is executive functioning. And this is where most of our adoptive students fall into, is difficulties with executive functioning. So I know the material. I can do the homework. And then somewhere between the house and the school, my homework goes into an abyss. That's an executive functioning issues. Impulsivity is an executive functioning. Not some of the behavioral social skills have to do with executive functioning. And even writing can be an executive functioning issue because you have to think of what to say and then translate that into your hand to get your hand to coordinate with what your brain is thinking. So that there's a lot of steps and it's a complex process. So sometimes we need to help our students with those complex processes in order to help them access school. And that is where specialized academic instruction comes in to help a student figure out how to navigate those things and also how some of the accommodations and modifications come into play.
What kind of questions can a parent ask themselves to figure out if their child has executive functioning issues or if it's just they're sitting too far away from the board and you can just ask to move seats? because they can't read the curriculum because they're nearsighted or farsighted. What are the questions the parent should ask themselves in deciding whether their child might need this?
I would look at their daily routine. Is this a child that you give a child 3 to 5 things to do? Would you please take out the trash, grab my water from off the counter and bring it to me, and turn the TV off? If the child can't complete all 3 of those tasks, they have an executive functioning issue because they can't remember them. They're only able to do one thing at a time, one-track brain. That's an executive functioning. And when we talk about kids that are in foster care or adopted, a lot of the times they have to focus just on where they're at right now. And that takes all of their energy. So they don't have the energy to do these other things. Or students with certain disabilities are the same way. All of their energy is taken, focused on trying to do one thing that they don't have the capacity, the windows, so to speak, to do other things.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. If a family member feels the need to set up an IEP or a 504, is that what it was?
Uh-huh.
Okay. If they feel that they need to set that up and they are not within the LEAF program, who can they reach out to help advocate for their child if they feel they cannot advocate and make a strong case?
There are several different things depending upon where you are, where you're located in the state of California. But you are given a parent right pamphlet, and when you're given that pamphlet, that there should be, you can ask, okay, who in this area knows about this? The other thing is that the case manager, the teacher who gives you that packet, has the responsibility to go over those rights with you if you request. A lot of the times, parents are kind of pressured into, I don't want to sit and go through a packet that's 2 inches thick with this person in the interest of time. So setting up an appointment to go through that with the case manager is a really great idea. Or if you contact any, you can actually ask what agency in this area helps with that. That's what I would do.
What if they're outside of California? To your knowledge, are IEPs offered out in other states?
IEPs are offered in every state. They are a federal program. So are 504s. 504s and IEPs are both federal programs. And yes, there are advocates. There are advocates, there are lawyers, and there are help centers throughout the state.
Perfect.
One place I would go to, which would be my first stop if I was considering an IEP or 504, is rightslaw.com. And they are the foremost authority on IEPs and 504s. And people that they are affiliated with have written several books on it. And I would definitely look at that.
So what is the difference between accommodation and modification?
So an accommodation keeps the same state standard. So everything that your child learns is on a state standard. And they have a standardized test at the end of the year to see how much of that they have mastered in the year. So an accommodation does not change that state standard. So if my 3rd grade standard is to learn my multiplication tables, but I have difficulty, I might be able to use a multiplication chart where I have to take my fingers and find the multiplication as an accommodation because I'm still required to do those multiplication charts. Or multiplication. Whereas if that's not going to work, I may be given a calculator and taught how to use a calculator because I'm never going to remember my times tables. And so I just punch the numbers into the calculator. In the first scenario, I'm doing the work. So I am still meeting the standard. In the second scenario, the calculator is doing the work. So the calculator, we don't grade a calculator. So that becomes a modification. So whether or not the state standard is upheld. So depending on how we shorten assignments, if we shorten assignments to focus on mastery and we're still showing that child is mastering each thing, then we are accommodating. So we have them, instead of writing every problem, every question on a worksheet that's on grammar, we have them do 3 out of 5 grammar sentences. We're still showing that they mastered how to use grammar, but they haven't had to do the whole worksheet. That's an accommodation. If I'm talking about essays, and instead of doing a 3-paragraph essay, I'm allowing this student to do a 1-paragraph essay, that is a different standard. And so that becomes a modification. And that changes the whole grading situation, and it will affect credits and things like that once you get into high school.
So what does an IEP meeting look like?
So what we need to understand in an IEP is a team process. So each person in the room should have the same say. So it is comprised of, at minimum, an administrator, the teacher or case manager, and a parent. If you don't have at least those 3 minimums, then you don't have an actual team that's well-rounded. Any person who is providing services should be a part of that team. Depending upon timing, sometimes a specific teacher can't make it, or one of the service providers can't make it, and they can provide a written statement. That's fine, as long as it's not going to impede the information that you need. And a parent would have to sign a notice that waives their attendance. So that's really important to note. And it's also important to note that there is no limit to the number of people a parent can bring. I have been in an IEP with 15 staff members. And if a parent goes by themselves into a meeting with 15 staff members, and this is a team decision,
right,
the parent's voice is going to get lost. So one of the things that LEAF does is we bring a team with us. I am remote because I cover half of the state of California, and there's just me at the moment. So I'm remote, but we have your team that comes into your home go with you to the IEP, so you're not alone and you have that support.
Yes, absolutely.
So parents have 3 choices when it comes to an IEP. First choice, agree to the IEP. Please don't agree to the IEP while you're at the IEP unless you're getting a copy of it to take home. That's really, really important, because I have seen where things get omitted or added that, by mistake, that should have been a part of the IEP. So you can always say, you know what, I'd like to review this before I sign it. So number 1 is you can sign the IEP. Once you sign it, it goes into effect, and we move forward. Second choice is, I agree to this IEP except this piece. So I had a family where they were putting a behavior intervention plan in place, and at the same meeting, they were talking about putting the student at a non-public school. The parents agreed to the behavior intervention plan. They did not agree to the public school. So they signed, I agree to everything except the offer of FAPE, which is the free and appropriate education. And then the third choice is to not sign it at all. If you go into one and they say, we want to stop services for little Johnny, please don't sign the IEP. Please don't sign it. You have the right not to sign that IEP, and that means the last one becomes a stay in place. It triggers due process, which means that the school has to prove why they're taking that away from your family. Whoever files due process is the one that has to prove why that needs to happen or not happen, as the case may be. So that's very important to know. The other really important thing to know is that in the present levels section, there is a piece that asks about the strengths and interests of your child. Please don't let them skip over that in the interest of time. That is what changes the IEP from being about a student to being about your student. This is where you can get buy-in of how wonderful your kid is, and when they're given the supports and services they need, they'll be able to access the education and excel in school. The second question you're going to be asked is, what concerns do you have in education? The answer to that is simple. My student has had a lot of trauma in their life, and I would like help with the school to mitigate that trauma and assist the student in meeting their educational needs. So now we're reminding them that the behavior they're seeing isn't because Johnny's a bad kid. We're reminding the school that you're seeing these behaviors from Johnny because Johnny's been through trauma. Because Johnny has not had the ideal life that most students get. And, all behavior is communication. We want to remind them the behavior they're seeing is because of an unmet need, not because Johnny's a bad kid.
Awesome. And we're going to put all this information in the descriptions below, or if you're just listening in, it'll be in the description on the streaming platform within this episode. Thank you so much for sharing. If you guys have any further questions or concerns, do your research, reach out. We will have contact information for Opal and other services if you're in California. And as you know, IEP and 504s are in every state. If you guys have questions, please reach out in the comment section or on our website, and we will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in.